My name is Roger Porter, Director of the Center for Business and Government, and I am pleased to welcome you to this forum event. Today is the first day of the fourth annual Harvard International Development Conference, and to join in welcoming you to this event is Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Harvard Institute for International Development. Jeff is well known not only at the Kennedy School and at Harvard, but around the world. A very precocious economist, he received his bachelor's, master's, and PhD's degrees in economics here at Harvard, joined the faculty, and was promoted to full professor within 3 years. He serves as an economic advisor to governments in Latin America, Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union, Asia, and Africa, and his advice is taken. In part, this is because he is someone full of ideas and energy, persistence and commitment, qualities that often spell the difference between success and failure in the shaping of public policy. He's also a good friend and a remarkable colleague. Jeff Sachs.
Thank you very much, Roger. That was a very tough accusation. It's not all our fault. But thank you for the very warm words, and especially I'd like to congratulate the organizers of this now annual and important conference, which has successfully drawn in recent years a tremendous outpouring of interest and has enabled us to be host to such outstanding global personalities as we have as the main speaker this evening. I will not take much time up at the podium, therefore, because the star attraction awaits you, and everybody very much looks forward to his remarks. I wanted to welcome you as director of the Harvard Institute for International Development, and to spend a few minutes with you giving you an idea of the remarkable and ever-expanding range of activities that Harvard is involved in international development with the HID, of course, but also with the new and important initiatives, a new Center for International Development that the Harvard Institute and the Kennedy School will be establishing beginning July to deepen our research on problems of international development, as well as a new and major teaching program in international development, a new master's program that will begin in September 1999. So we have enormously important initiatives which I think reflect what all of you here know, which is that the challenges of international development are perhaps the greatest challenges facing the world today. And if you'll permit me to say a few words about how we understand those challenges and the ways that Harvard might contribute in a small way to what is really mankind's greatest task right now, I would be grateful. The concept of helping developing countries and the whole concept of developing countries in and of itself is a bit of a misnomer, in my opinion, because while we sometimes think that there's the developed world and then there's a problem of developing countries, it's extraordinarily important to keep in mind that almost all of the world is what we call developing countries. The problem of development is a problem that is truly global and confronts us all. The World Bank estimates that about 4.8 billion of the world's 5.7 billion people live in developing countries, roughly 85% of the world. So the state of development is something extremely special and unusual, and the struggle for improvement in material conditions and all that goes along with it, improvement in the quality of life, access to health care, life opportunities, prospects for education, for shelter, and for other basic needs, is a struggle that still envelops almost the entire world. The gap between the rich and the poor is almost unconscionable, and until very, very recently, continuing to grow. Those 4.7 billion people that I mentioned who are almost the world, but which we call the developing world, have an average annual income of about $1,000 per person, compared with an average income in the developed countries of about $25,000 per capita. It's estimated, although of course these data are very imperfect and they only give a very, very crude sense of reality, it's estimated by economic historians that the average income levels in Africa now, put by one leading historian, Angus Madison, at around $1,200 on average in Africa, is about the same as in Western Europe as of the year 1820. So that we're talking about a gap of more than a century. Of course, these numbers hide as much as they reveal, and I don't want you to focus on the specific numbers, but I do want you to focus on the extent of the challenge that we're facing. At Harvard, we've always regarded it as our task to confront this challenge in three basic ways. First, and I believe most fundamentally, we have to understand it. And that's very, very tough. Because the question of understanding why some regions of the world have developed and others have not, why some countries grow and others do not, what should be done to promote economic development, what would be the most effective means, what are the true blockages and so forth, is extraordinarily complex. And I think as the intellectual center that we are, and with our shared commitment to understanding and analysis, this has to be the starting point for us. And it is a long and difficult journey together to approach a serious understanding of such a complex and multifaceted problem as this one. A second goal, of course, is training and education. And there I'm, of course, thrilled that this institution, the Kennedy School, has played such a pivotal role in training through the Mason program and many other programs of training the tools that one needs to begin to grapple with the challenges of development. But I'm also particularly thrilled, as I mentioned, that we are going to deepen our commitment to training and education by launching what I think will be the, now this is Harvard's bias, of course, but what I think will be the preeminent two-year master's program in international development that one can find anywhere, and we are making a very, very deep commitment to making this an absolutely outstanding and unique program. And as I say, one that will be launched in the beginning of the academic year following the coming academic year. And of course, the third part of our commitment to the world has always been action, and that is to apply the best possible knowledge with people that are trained with the best possible tools and skills to address practical problems. We've always understood that this is a core function of the university. It's not just something that comes outside of the university. The interplay of action and knowledge is absolutely critical to an effective functioning in both the spheres of research and understanding as well as the spheres of practice. And HID now for a quarter of a century has been committed and I think has delivered the finest kinds of assistance and in cooperative efforts with colleagues in all parts of the world. At last count, we've worked in about 100 countries all over the world and currently are working in literally dozens of countries with wonderful, wonderful colleagues of our own and colleagues with shared commitments, of course, from the countries in which we're working. We are beginning, or I should say, we are ever increasing, we hope, our understanding of the fundamental challenges that lie ahead. And in 3 minutes, I'd like to give you 3 ideas of the directions that we're taking in our research and our attempt at deepening our understanding of this great human puzzle and great human drama of the development challenge. If we can see the first overhead, I hope. Color-coded for your convenience. This is a map to remind you of a couple of salient points. This is a map that is color-coded by income levels around the world. And the very light band in the equatorial region, of course, in the world tropics, indicates that these are the very poorest parts of the world. What we understand more and more in our research is how much the human geography and the human economic challenge go together. The tropics, as a general rule, remains by far the poorest part of the world. Among the top 30 countries in the world, only 2% of the population of those countries live in tropical regions. The scourges of tropical disease, the difficulties of tropical agriculture are the kinds of directions of investigation that we are now taking in response to this very clear relationship between geography and economic development right now. And we're trying very much to deepen our understanding. What is one of the problems in the tropics? We know, if you could show the second slide, that that band of light colors, no, sorry, that's not the second slide. That's the fourth one. Please, if you could show the slide that was number 2. Good. Thank you. That band of very low GNPs is very similar to the band of red countries shown here, where malaria remains a deep, dreaded burden on much of human society. The only point I want to make is that the closer that one looks, the continuing basic problems of health and the challenge of tropical disease, which continues to afflict more than 1 billion people in this world, with some of the traditional and re-emerging and newly emerging diseases, remains a central part of the development challenge. We're not just talking about banking and financial markets and other things that finance ministers typically talk about. This challenge of development and the puzzle of development cuts across all aspects of the human ecology: the physical geography, the disease environment, the agricultural environment, and other aspects of the human environment in which we live. If you could put on the third slide. This is very hard for you to see, but what you would see if you could see it is the fact that research, and our research increasingly has shown that where you live, not just because of the tropical disease, which is important, but where you live with respect to world trade turns out to be enormously important as well. Trade is a fundamental engine of growth, and that means that vast populations far in the interior of continents face an especially difficult challenge. We have found in our recent research that the farther inland populations are, the more difficult it is for them to enjoy the benefits of modern economic growth. And there are hundreds of millions of people that remain largely untouched by the wonders of globalization, by the spread of markets, and that remain among the poorest parts of the world, no fault of their own, but a reflection of a deep human geography that dates back centuries, where populations developed for reasons of agriculture, not for reasons of being able to take advantage of economic growth at the end of the 20th century. And this is yet another illustration of the great interplay of the physical environment, the human ecology, the disease ecology, the trading environment, and the economy, which makes this both such an intellectually thrilling and captivating question and such a daunting human challenge. Finally, one last thought, and that one last slide. In recent years, with the end of communism, with the spread of democracy, and with the spread of peace, and the gentleman that we'll hear presently is, of course, one of the world leaders most responsible, because of his great vision and bravery in the 1980s for bringing peace and democracy to our hemisphere. Because of that, we have tremendous opportunities for development that we really could not have foreseen even a decade or two ago. And I'm thrilled to say, Mr. President, that because of the great work that you led, we have the opportunity and the high honor at Harvard of working closely now with the Central American governments in our project. It's thrilling to see what democracy, peace, and economic reform is meaning for the region. Our most recent visit, I felt, was one that gave cause for the optimism which we shared, but the optimism has very deep reasons, and many of them are due to your leadership, Mr. President. I think we're all very grateful for that. But let me say that while these political developments are thrilling in many parts of the world, the problems, again, of the deeper causes of poverty that even challenge these causes of war or lack of human rights or lack of economic rights are going to remain especially daunting for us in the decades ahead. What you have up on the screen, again, hard to see, but I think you'll get the basic idea, is a color-coded map showing projections of population increases that are projected by the United Nations for the next 35 years, essentially, up to the year 2030. And the dark red indicates the highest population growth areas of the world. We're expecting, barring utter disasters in the world, that by the fact of demographic momentum itself, we'll be adding 2 to 4 billion people to this planet in the next half century. And this will put incredible and unprecedented strains on environment, both globally and locally, and on the challenges of development. What this map shows you is a very uneasy truth about this, and that is that the very areas of the lowest income levels and the most profound inherent difficulties for growth are exactly the same areas that are now experiencing the most dramatic rates of population increase. So as those 3 billion or so people are added to this world, all aspiring for the chances of a decent life, they are coming into the world in the areas where it's going to be most profoundly difficult to see the deliverance of those expectations. And how we grapple with that problem, the challenges were hard enough, but to be able to meet the challenge of these profound and deep difficulties together with a massive increase of population, together with the strains that it is already putting on our global system, are going to require our absolutely deepest intellectual commitments and personal responsibility and commitment to action. That's what we're committed to doing here, and that is a commitment that I know that you, by being here, share, and I'm very grateful for that. I want to thank the organizers once again for the opportunity to greet you, to thank you for the conference, and again, Mr. President, to thank you for honoring us with your presence.
Our speaker this evening is as comfortable in the halls of academia as he is in the corridors of power and government. Oscar Arias studied law and economics at the University of Costa Rica and received a doctorate in political science at the University of Essex in England. He began a promising academic career as a professor of political science at the University of Costa Rica. Yet in his mid-30s, he began a career in public life that has demonstrated how individuals can shape history. Thomas Carlyle wrote about the great man in history, that men and women could shape events and influence their destiny. Our speaker this evening serves as an example that provides much support for Carlyle's argument. Appointed Costa Rican Minister of Planning and Economic Policy, Dr. Arias won a seat in the Costa Rican Congress in 1978, and in 1986 was elected president of his country. He assumed office at a time of great regional discord. His predecessor had chosen not to get embroiled in the growing conflict. But President Arias determined to actively promote peace. In a move that would prove remarkably effective, before taking office, he traveled throughout Central and South America to personally invite the Latin American heads of state to visit Costa Rica for his presidential inaugural. On the day he took office, he convened the presidents of 9 Latin American countries at a meeting in San Jose. And there he called for a continental alliance for the defense of democracy and liberty that would affirm that all Central Americans were entitled to the same liberties and social and economic guarantees of democracy. The following year, he drafted a peace plan to end the regional crisis, a plan that led to an accord signed by all Central American presidents on August 7th of that year. The following year, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. His work continues, and the awards and recognition, including an honorary doctorate from Harvard, are a testament to him and his work. He continues to travel the globe extensively and to work tirelessly to curtail the global arms trade and to promote democracy and human rights. Some have unfortunately suggested that successful people are either thinkers or doers. President Oscar Arias has demonstrated what can happen when one combines vision, careful thinking, unfailing commitment, and a determination to produce constructive change. Please join me in welcoming President Oscar Arias. Thank you.
Gracias. Queridos amigos, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to participate in the 4th Annual Harvard Conference on International Development. I thank the International Development Clubs of the Kennedy School of Government and the Harvard Business School for the opportunity to exchange ideas with this distinguished audience of future leaders whose decisions will determine the trajectory of global development practices through the 21st century. Like many of you, I am a proud owner of a Harvard degree. However, instead of having to study for 6 years, I received my PhD after delivering a 20-minute speech at the 1980s. Just the other day, I took a stroll through the Cambridge Commons, where I live nearby, and noticed the memorial sculpture dedicated to Ireland's years of great hunger. Etched upon the stone was Mary Robinson's haunting reprimand: "Never again should a people starve in a world of plenty." This message speaks to everyone in the developed world. It is no more than no less than a call to human responsibility. As we ponder this bewildering era of globalization and the frantic quest for profits and power that characterizes, we must always be conscious of the hapless millions left behind. While global trade and foreign investment explode across the planet, those in the developing world are left reeling from the jarring impact. It goes without saying that in the event of war, the global community expresses outrage and immediately works together to stop the flow of bloodshed. But there is a war going on right now that has gone unrecognized. Yet, it is as gruesome as any through the course of human history. Called poverty, disease, ignorance, and injustice, it is the equivalent of a full-scale siege upon the disadvantage of our planet. Let us recall for only a moment the horror of Hiroshima. Hundreds of thousands of lives wiped indiscriminately off the face of the earth in one terrible instant. Yet we would need 236 such bombs to equal today's annual infant mortality rate due to malnutrition. When we pray for world peace, do we think of all those killed by hunger or maimed by disease? To obtain peace, it is not enough that global fighting ceases. True peace begins the moment that unacceptable quality of life is attained by the world's underprivileged. Thus, as students of international development, you all have the opportunity to contribute significantly to economic equality as well as to world peace. In our time, we have made unprecedented strides to foster human development. During the World Summit for Social Development in 1995, almost every nation on the planet made a commitment to eradicate severe poverty. Though such a goal may seem utopian, consider the progress we have made up to now. The United Nations Development Programme reports that in the past 50 years, poverty has fallen more than in the previous 500. Since 1960, child death rates in developing countries have been more than half. Malnutrition rates have been reduced by almost a third, and the proportion of children not attending primary school has decreased from more than half to less than a quarter. By the end of this century, approximately 3 to 4 billion people will have enjoyed considerable improvements in their standard of living, and about 4 to 5 billion will have access to basic education and health care. These advances underscore the fact that the eradication of poverty is not a wistful, naive hope. It is a veritable possibility. But this headway will only continue if we declare both local and international human development to be the main agenda of our political, social, and economic institutions. As Franklin D. Roosevelt said in 1937, the test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. As we enter a new era, we must constantly remind ourselves that human security, in contrast to the traditional concept of security linked to military capacity and economic power, must be the ultimate goal of our development policies. In qualitative terms, human security represents the degree to which human beings are protected from ignorance, sickness, hunger, neglect, and persecution. It is the standard that dignifies human life. It is a child who is saved, a disease that is cured, an ethnic tension that is soothed, a dissident who speaks freely, a human spirit that has hope. My friends, I must ask you, has every cancer project brought a cure? Has every space mission succeeded? Has every diplomatic initiative brought peace? No, indeed. Yet we have not lost our resolve in any of these areas. Why should we show any less persistence in our fight to establish human security? Nevertheless, even as the emphasis on true human development gains acceptance, a rival global attitude counters us at every step along the path to progress. Whether consciously or not, many individuals allow the drive for macroeconomic success to trample over the most vulnerable of our society. Indeed, free market capitalism has had bittersweet results for the South. While several economic gains have been made, many individuals have also fallen casualty to this system. For instance, Latin America, as you are aware, has the worst distribution of wealth in the world. The income gap that exists between rich and poor is by far the widest and most profound on this planet. As Carlos Fuentes pointed out, 24 individuals in Mexico possess more wealth than 24 million people. Furthermore, the richest 20% of Brazil's population earn 32 times more than the poorest 20%. Inequity, however, does not only affect the poor. Over the course of Latin America's history, severe income disparity has provoked a bloody and long-lived cycle of insurrections which which has claimed thousands of lives. The state of the impoverished in the developing world, despite our achievements over the past few decades, is grave indeed and warrants immediate action. Consider the following harrowing facts. 14,000 children die each day from malnutrition and disease. 40,000 children die each day from malnutrition and disease. Water contaminated by sewage is estimated to kill 2 million children every year. Only 30% of the population in Delhi, India, have access to a sewage system. In Karachi, Pakistan, only 20% have such access. Some 840 million people go hungry or face food insecurity. Nearly a third of the people in the least developed countries are not expected to survive to the age of 40. 1.3 billion people live on incomes of less than $1 a day. 1.5 billion people lack access to health services. 1.3 billion people lack access to potable water. Nearly a billion people are illiterate, and 2/3 of them are women. Many believe that globalization is the talisman which will break poverty's curse upon humanity. It is true that it has helped reduce poverty in some of the largest and strongest economies, China, India, and some of the Asian tigers. Yet this capricious process benefits only a precious few, while producing many losers among and within nations. In fact, a widening crevice between haves and have-nots can be found in both developing and developed nations. Several industrialized countries have seen unemployment soar to levels not recorded since the 1930s, and income inequality reached figures comparable to 19th century levels. Yet the most alarming consequences have been observed in the developing world. Over 100 nations show sluggish economic growth, stagnation, or even decline. The ratio of global trade to GDP has been falling for 44 developing countries, which together comprise more than 1 billion people. The least developed countries, accounting for 10% of the world's population, own only 0.3% of world trade, half their share of 2 decades ago. The list goes on. Average tariffs on industrial country imports from the least developed countries are 30% higher than the global average. Furthermore, developing nations lose about $60 billion a year from agricultural subsidies and barriers to textile exports in industrial countries. If industrialized nations do not rise up in solidarity to assist their less fortunate peers, the South will be forever condemned to suffering and powerlessness. Where then does the mission begin to further human development and alleviate rampant global poverty? With ourselves. Each one of us must shoulder some responsibility for the deprived conditions found within a greater part of the world's communities. We may not be the direct instigators of these situations, but as long as we permit social inequality to exist, we are accomplices in the destruction. No longer can these issues afford to be discussed as mere academic topics in universities or as debates in the privacy of one's home. This, my friends, is a call to action. You may very well demand what economic resources are available to furnish immediate global poverty relief. In response, I will ask you to consider something almost too wonderful to seem possible. Imagine if just a portion of world military spending was redirected toward human development. In 1995, world military spending totaled nearly $800 billion. If we channel just $40 billion of that figure over the next 10 years into anti-poverty programs, all of the world's population would enjoy basic social services, such as education, health care, and nutrition, clean water, and sanitation. Another $40 billion over 10 years would provide all people on the planet with an income above the poverty line for the country. Since the end of the Cold War, many industrialized nations have reduced their defense budgets. As a result, those countries' arms merchants have turned to new clients in the developing world, where the majority of today's conflicts take place. The United States stands as an extreme case. Currently, the US is responsible for 45% of all weapons deliveries in the world. And in the past 4 years, 80% of US arms sales have gone to undemocratic government in the developing world. During President Clinton's first term in office, his administration gave $35.9 billion to the militaries of non-democratic governments for arms and training, an average of $9 billion per year. This figure represents 82% of the $44 billion in total US military support for developing nations. Unfortunately, half of the world's governments dedicate more resources to defense than to health programs. Such distortions in national budgets contribute to income poverty and retard human development. War and the preparation for war is one of the greatest obstacles to human progress, fostering a vicious cycle of arms buildups, violence, and poverty. In sub-Saharan Africa, military expenditures total nearly $8 billion in 1995. This figure is simply appalling, considering that this region's population, which doubles about every 20 years, has the highest proportion of poor in the world. Sub-Saharan Africa falls well behind other developing countries on both the Human Poverty Index and the Human Development Index. 9 of the 10 countries with the lowest Human Poverty Index are in Sub-Saharan Africa. That is to say, that more than 50% of the residents of those countries have incomes that fall below the poverty line. Moreover, the last 12 places on the Human Development Index are occupied by nations in Sub-Saharan Africa. President Clinton's recent visit to Africa may have sent an encouraging message to the struggling nations of that continent. Nevertheless, their severe concerns require profound action. Mere words and well-meaning gestures will not suffice. Although aid is desperately needed, Washington's assistance to Africa has dropped to a 10-year low. Aid from France, Japan, and Germany far exceeds that of the United States, and assistance from many other European nations, such as little Denmark, is approaching US levels. The United States must re-examine a foreign policy which provides Africa's 700 million people with only $700 million in economic aid, while it channels $3 billion of economic and military aid into tiny Israel. The industrialized world must take 2 immediate actions on Africa's behalf. First, it must resist from selling arms to African governments, which only serves to rub salt on their wounds. Second, given that the total value of sub-Saharan Africa's debt is equivalent to just 1% of the OECD countries' collective GDP, lender nations and Bretton Woods institutions must stop demanding compensation from this region. Paying this relatively insignificant sum will only further deprive African populations of their most basic necessities. In South Asia, an arms race rages between India and Pakistan, fueled by a dispute over the Kashmir territory. India spent more than $12 billion on arms purchases from 1988 to 1992 alone, more than either Saudi Arabia or Iraq during the same period. From 1978 to 1991, Pakistan increased its defense budget 7-fold, so that defense now accounts for nearly 40% of all government spending. These 2 nations, which rank alarmingly low on the Human Development Index, expend exorbitant amounts on this unforgivable arms race, leaving their people in their own desperate race against time to merely survive. In the last few years, Two countries in Latin America have taken historic steps toward ending once and for all the vicious cycle of poverty and militarism. Following the restoration of democracy to Panama in 1989 and to Haiti in 1994, I helped persuade both countries to constitutionally abolish their national armies, as Costa Rica itself did in 1948. As a result, Costa Rica and Panama now enjoy the safest border in the world. Furthermore, Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, where the military, as you are aware, has been responsible for more than 26 coups d'etat since independence, may now dedicate more resources to crucial development needs. These landmark decisions have shown the world that Costa Rica is not a unique case. The abolition of national armed forces is truly a viable option for many countries. Commitments made toward demilitarization in the developing world must be supported by responsible leadership in the international community. Yet, in several industrialized countries that manufacture weapons, armament production is viewed as a vital source of employment and income. Nevertheless, world leaders must accept the fact that we cannot let the free market rule the international arms trade. We must not enrich ourselves through the commerce of death. Rather, we must realize that the arms trade is most often a friend of dictators and an enemy of the people. The time has come to choose between human lives and arms. Indeed, we must settle on nothing less than a comprehensive international effort to regulate and monitor arms transfers. Toward this end, I convened a meeting on May 29 of last year with 7 other Nobel Peace Laureates, Elie Wiesel, the Dalai Lama, José Ramos Horta, Betty Williams, and the directors of American Friends Service Committee, Amnesty International, and International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, to publicly unveil an international code of conduct on arms transfers. This code is also fully endorsed by 8 more Nobel Peace Laureates: Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Lech Walesa, Rigoberta Menchú, Adolfo Pérez Esquivel, Moira Maguire, Norman Borlaug, Joseph Rotblat, and this year's winner, Jody Williams. Furthermore, former President Jimmy Carter has expressed his strong support for the Code of Conduct. This international Code of Conduct on arms transfers would prevent undemocratic governments from building sophisticated arsenals. Governments which systematically abuse internationally recognized human rights through practices such as torture or arbitrary executions would not receive military training. Countries who commit genocide will not be able to buy munitions. Governments engaged in armed aggression against other countries or peoples could not buy missiles. States that support terrorism would be prevented from acquiring weapons. In addition, all nations would be required to report their arms purchases to the United Nations. This code of conduct would undeniably promote global security and protect human rights. Current initiatives to restrict arms sales in the United States and the European Union represent the first step toward our mission for peace. Just recently, owing to backroom dealings and political tricks, the U.S. Code of Conduct on Arms Transfers failed to pass a joint House-Senate Conference Committee. Nevertheless, its strong showing, which forced the opposition to resort to underhanded tactics, was indicative of the Code's moral sway and great promise. Across the Atlantic, Belgium and the United Kingdom have taken the lead in promoting a comparable European version. Some might question the Code's relationship to the free market concept of supply and demand. If a country leaders want arms, some might ask, who are we to say that they shouldn't have them? That question merits 2 responses. First, as I stated above, since the end of the Cold War, arms manufacturers have been aggressively promoting sales to the developing world in order to compensate for the drastic reduction in arms purchases by most industrialized countries. Furthermore, When we assert that a nation desires arms, to whom exactly are we referring? Is the single mother in Indonesia or the street orphan in Egypt pressuring government leaders to buy tanks and missiles? Or is it a dictator who sees arms purchases as the only way to maintain power and become richer, I should add? The poor of the world are crying out for schools and doctors, not generals and guns. Another argument posited to justify the sale of arms is that if one country does not sell arms to a nation that wishes to buy them, someone else will. That is precisely why all arms-selling nations must agree to certain common restrictions. We can no longer say business is business and turn a blind eye to the poverty and oppression caused by arms transfers. Just like slavery and the drug trade, the arms trade reaps profits tainted with blood. On August 1st of last year, the Clinton administration, as you are aware, lifted a ban on supplying high-technology weapons to Latin America. Now, all of Latin America has the opportunity to spend millions of dollars on a variety of sophisticated death machines, such as the F-16 fighter jet. Eliminating this policy, which former President Jimmy Carter adopted with great vision and courage in 1978, may result in a tragic arms race in South America. Tragic not only because the possibility for international conflict in the region has now appeared, but also because an enhanced arms trade would inevitably signify an increase in poverty and a deterioration in the living conditions of the majority of Latin Americans. The United States must encourage a reduction in Latin American military spending out of basic human solidarity. After all, our highest priority must be to free economic resources so that we may educate and nourish our children. Our children want schools and health clinics, not F-16s. Almost half a century ago, former U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles stated that the U.S. has no friends in Latin America, only interests. Sadly, given the current state of affairs, it seems that the words of Mr. Dulles remain true to this day. After President Clinton's reversal of the ban, I proposed to all heads of state in this hemisphere that they endorse a 2-year moratorium on the purchase of high-tech weapons for their countries. Tomorrow, as you are aware, these leaders will be debating issues of free trade and education at the Summit of the Americas in Santiago, Chile. If they omit the moratorium from their agenda, the children of Latin America will never forgive them. Our heads of state must decide to place human development before human destruction. Friends, you will recall that I opened this presentation with an appeal to human responsibility. Throughout the millennia, prophets, saints, and sages have implored us to take our responsibilities seriously. In our century, for example, Mahatma Gandhi preached on the 7 social sins: politics without principles, commerce without morality, wealth without work, education without character, science without humanity, pleasure without conscience, and worship without sacrifice. In any society, freedom can never be exercised without conscience. Responsibility as a moral quality serves as a natural voluntary check for freedom. Thus, although the privilege and joy enhance freedom in this era of globalization, they also bear more responsibility toward others as well as themselves. 200 years ago, British politician Edmund Burke spoke of a sacred responsibility that the representative owes to his constituency. I quote, "It is the representative's duty to sacrifice his repose, his pleasures, his satisfactions to his constituents, and above all, ever and in all cases to prefer their interests to his own. But his unbiased opinion, his mature judgment, his enlightened conscience, he ought not to sacrifice to any set of men living. These he does not derive from your pleasure, no, nor from the law and the Constitution. They are a trust from Providence, for the abuse of which he is deeply answerable. Your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. End of quote. These ideas were voiced in 1774, yet they continue to be exemplary today. Without a doubt, we have the knowledge and the resources to continue to make great progress on the road to human development and true peace. We now only need individuals with mature judgment to take the lead in advocating for the poor of our global society. As future leaders in both the private and public sectors, you all share in the responsibility articulated by Edmund Burke. It is essential that you contemplate the best strategies to serve the underprivileged. Then, you must begin the crusade for conscientious human development in your own communities and nations. Only in this way may we instill a sustained concern for the impoverished within the national and global consciousness. In the dense rainforests of Central America, Mother Nature frequently provides us with an enlightening lesson. When a storm topples a tree, its roots pull up the roots of the surrounding trees, causing them to fall as well. In much the same way, today's world is a compact forest of cultures, states, and nations whose roots form an interlaced, inextricable network. The survival of each tree depends on the well-being of all the others. A nation traumatized by war, by oppression, or by poverty is like a tree on the verge of falling. It is an omen of danger for the entire forest. Truly, there is no time to delay, for there is danger all around us. We must use our wisdom to form an alliance of global citizens to fight for equality and justice. Our sword will be our determination, our shield, our solidarity. The arms trade, let us win this struggle against poverty, the arms trade, and human avarice. For if we are not their victors, we will certainly be their victims. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, our time is short because President Arias has a flight to catch, but we do have time for just a couple of quick questions, so I'd appreciate it if you would keep them short, and let's start here with the gentleman.
Yes, I very much appreciate your speech. Following up on Professor Sachs's last slide, China was colored in green, and I don't in any way applaud their method of birth control, but in what way, in your speech, you did not address either women's rights or birth control and its accessibility as a priority. And I wonder if you can comment on that and how the world can address that issue, since if there are going to be 2 to 4 more billion people shortly, short of war, disease, and so forth, it seems the most cost-efficient way to address that would be an effective global population control program.
Well, yes, we did know that it is a fact that the world's population will be around 10 billion people only in 30 years' time, 40 years' time. In sub-Saharan Africa, in the next 40 years, the population will triple. By the year 2040, 2050, sub-Saharan Africa will have 2 billion people. Perhaps they will be much poorer than what they are today. A couple of Nobel Peace Laureates have recommended that if only we could spend about 6 or 8% of what the developing countries spend on defense to provide basic family planning packages to willing couples, we might help stabilize the population in the developing world by the year 2020. So it's just a matter of will. We know where the money is. I keep telling my friends in the developing world that if you want to become wealthy, you need to rob a bank, because that's where the money is. Well, in the national budgets, where the money is in defense, in arms, in military men that we don't need. Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't need armies of 60,000 men, 80,000 men. Latin American countries doesn't need armies of 50,000, 60,000, 80,000 men. I think it's a matter of will. Yes, sir.
My name is Tipton. I'm on the board of the Association to Unite the Democracies in Washington. Last year I heard you speak at MIT, in which you, my memory says you were a little bit more direct at criticizing President Clinton for being in charge of a country which is the greatest supplier of arms in the world. My question, though, is you mentioned several other roles that would help in the world. What could you tell us that we might do as individual citizens rather than leaders that might help support these roles, these programs that you recommend?
Well, one good way would be to ask your representatives in the U.S. Congress to support the U.S. Code of Conduct on arms transfers. It is debated every year. You are fortunate because as citizens from Massachusetts, John Kerry is very much involved in supporting this Code of Conduct, and he has exercised a great leadership in the U.S. Senate. But it hasn't been voted in the Senate, only in the House, and it hasn't been passed. So it will take some time. I agree, this is an idea whose time hasn't come. If it took Jody Williams about 6 years to get the support of more than 1,000 NGOs for this declaration of for the banning of the landmines, it is going to take the Nobel laureates who are signing this international code of conduct a longer time, because we are hurting too many powerful interests here. It is not true, as people say, that the reason why arms need to be exported is because of jobs. It's because of profits. It's because it's a very profitable business. And American manufacturers of arms know very well that the Pentagon is not going to buy them, so they are manufacturing these arms to be sold abroad. And as I pointed out last year, 85% of these weapons went to non-democratic countries, that is, authoritarian governments. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jim Westcott. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School. Turn the corner a little bit. What recommendations would you have for the peacemakers in Ireland and the struggles that they're going through based on your experience in Central America? Thank you.
My experience is that you need to be very perseverant, very humble, work very hard, 24 hours a day, and not be afraid to negotiate and to sit around the negotiating table the time that is needed. I would like to congratulate former Senator Mitchell for his job in Northern Ireland, as well as the Irish people. But on the other hand, I deplore the lack of success in the Middle East. And I don't want to blame anybody, but I'm sure that with more pressure from Washington, Netanyahu will be at the negotiating table tomorrow. It's really very sad. You know, in order to reach peace, you need to take risks. Rabin took a risk. Shimon Peres took a risk, and Arafat. Netanyahu doesn't want to take any risks. And it's much easier to make war than to make peace. But the international community, that is Washington mainly, should be putting more pressure on Mr. Netanyahu. I'm very glad that Tony Blair is visiting Israel. The Europeans are getting much more involved in the Middle East peace process.
Thank you very much.
I have time for more.
He's hoping on a fast taxi cab driver, and so he said he would take two more questions if anyone would like to
Yes.
ask them. Yes, sir.
Yes.
If you'd please come to the mic and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for your coming here and addressing wonderful speech. I would like to raise one question about new idea, philosophy of you toward the new millennium of near future. I mean that what's the most valuable human being's value of the new century?
Well, you're asking a politician, not a philosopher, this question. But as I have pointed out on many occasions, I don't think we can survive in the 21st century with the ethics of the 20th century. As I pointed out this afternoon, we have lived in the most, in the bloodiest, the 20th century has been the bloodiest centuries in the history of humankind. And what has prevailed has been a lot of greed, a lot of selfishness, a lot of individualism. In this country, the word most frequently used is interest. If it is in the U.S. interest, if it is not in the U.S. interest, I think we need to ask for more compassion and for more solidarity. But certainly, we're not addressing the basic problems that confront humanity. I keep asking my friends in Washington, who is the enemy now? The enemy is inequality. The enemy is disease. The enemy is poverty. The enemy is environmental degradation. The enemy is drugs. The enemy is terrorism. The enemy is increasing poverty. Jeffrey Sachs has told us that certainly I'm very glad that he is so much involved in at least doing more academic work on the need to eradicate poverty or at least alleviate poverty. But certainly it's very sad because this great nation is the only economic superpower, is the only military superpower, but the rest of the world expects you to be also a moral superpower. And by selling arms, you are not indeed a moral superpower. One final question.
My name's Allison Ken. I'm a junior undergraduate here at the college. And I'm curious to hear your comments on the situation in Colombia. I recently read in the Washington Post that 40% of the country is now controlled by paramilitary troops, and that the president not only has a number of drug ties, but the next president, the likely next president, also has even more so. And I'm curious to hear about your comments on the situation there.
There are many Colombians here, and I'm sure that at the reception you can talk about it. All I could tell you is that it is very sad, but in Colombia there's no will to find to reach a negotiated peace. Since the days of Belisario Betancourt, and then with President Barco, and then with President Gaviria, and now today with President Samper, I've been involved in Colombia. I've been talking to the military, I've been talking to the FARC, to the guerrilla forces, Recently, I got together with the Catholic Church in Colombia, with the Commission of Reconciliation of Colombia, with representatives of the guerrillas, with the Defense Minister of Colombia, and indeed there is no will to negotiate a ceasefire and eventually peace among the Colombian people. I just want to finish perhaps with the remarks of with the words of Albert Einstein. He once said that only morality in our actions can give beauty and dignity to our lives. There is a need for decision makers in this country to put morality and values and principles before profits. Otherwise, your leadership is not going to be what the rest expects from Washington. A great leadership toward the construction of a better 21st century. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Unfortunately, President Arias must leave now, but Dana Bryson, who is one of the co-chairs of the conference, has a couple of short announcements for those who are attending it. Dana?
Hello. Thank you again, President Arias, for that thought-provoking speech. I have a couple quick announcements. The conference continues tomorrow, but it's at the business school. It's not here, so don't show up. There won't be anyone here. If you have questions or want to buy a ticket, we're selling them at a booth here and also at a booth at the reception. And speaking of the reception, it's right now. It's in the 5th floor of Taubman, which is the building diagonally across here. And it's open to all people involved in the conference. So, and there'll be food there. So, thank you very much.
Father Aguilar.
Oiga, Jorge Iván,